Sherlock Holmes The Awakened from the rebooted timeline. Yeah, this one's amazing. Now, this was released in 2023. Not too long ago, depending on this recording date. But it is a complete remake of the 2007 game in the original timeline. And I have to admit, remakes are tricky ground. They're always tricky ground. Because you never, especially if the original is well loved, and the original version of The Awakened is a very well loved game. And this really did it justice. Now, of course, this wasn't done in media res like the previous version was. This one does follow the story very, very closely with certain changes. But it changes certain details, and it does it very nicely, in my opinion. And it's done, actually, they divided it up into 8 chapters, which basically opens with Sherlock thinking he is on a case. He has found a case worthy of his talents, but it proves just to be him seeing patterns where there aren't. Of course, part of this is Sherlock trying to get a copy of the paper, going over to the new bookseller, Barnes. And deduces that Barnes is acting a little little out of the norm, and it's because he's trying to win the fancy of a flower seller across the street from him. Something that Holmes can actually deduce from just seeing things around the place. Of course, after now he's determined now that the case he was following was just he was seeing patterns where he shouldn't. He gets into the case that is the essence of the story. A Maori manservant has gone missing. It's the manservant of one of Watson's patients. And so Sherlock starts looking into it and discovers that there is something more to this than just a simple disappearance. This man was abducted. There's been other disappearances. And so he starts putting things together. Of course, during this chapter, you have a DLC side case. These side cases pop up. I think there's about 6 total. And they only show up in the first 4 chapters. Of course, once you figure out that Sherlock must go down to the wharf, it will ask you if you're ready to proceed, because you must do everything in each chapter accordingly. And I like how they incorporated the brain, his mind palace to this. That was not a factor in the original version of this game. Now, of course, Sherlock's investigation takes him down to the Wharf District, where he finds out that some people have been requesting some of the local constabularies to detain people that fit what they need. And we also learn of another disappearance. One of the families that are living in the little shanty town down there. Of course, Sherlock must find the right warehouse where these people are being taken to, and then discovers underneath a temple to Cthulhu. Of course, during this, we also get some otherworldly experiences with Sherlock, entering into like another dimension. And how much this is starting to disturb Sherlock. So we are already seeing certain changes from the original. Finding out who's behind things, why some people are hiding details. And these other worlds, these otherworldly trips that Sherlock ends up taking, there are puzzles there that must be solved too. Some that don't even seem feasible or possible. Now, of course, after we find this temple and we learn some certain things, we learn there's a connection to a sanitarium in Switzerland, Black Edelweiss. So we are off there. Sherlock pretending to be the person that they found that was dead to, quote, get admitted so that he can search the place. Finding, of course, other little mini cases like somebody was killing people there, but also learning more about it. Changing some core mechanics, like in the original when Sherlock is snooping around there, he has to knock out a guard, but the guard can catch him. This time you don't have to do any automatic aiming or anything like that. You don't have to do any aiming and attempting. It's pretty much automatic once you have everything together. And you also have to rely on Watson to help with some of this. And a little bit of forward thinking. The now person in charge is, instead of a male, a female. I'm sure they were male in the original version. But Sherlock is coming across signs. People are being messed with. And these certain people, in what is called the gateway to hell, they are having their brains poked and prodded so that they can pronounce a certain phrase. Of course, now for Sherlock to be able to get out, he needs to, they took out another part. See, in the original version, you find Moriarty in this place, which proved in the original timeline and in relation to cases, actual Sherlock Holmes cases, This happened after the Awakened happened after the final problem. This one happens now. We don't know. We can't place that. But we get our clues that lead us to New Orleans. Now, in the original, once we arrive in New Orleans, we have to chase somebody who stole our papers. And that leads us to our run-in with the corrupt sheriff there. That doesn't happen in this one. In fact, in this one, that's where it changes. That's a massive change to the better, I think. We investigate. We learn about people. We learn about an auction so we can find out who's selling these opals to lead us to our next point. And Sherlock has Watson take on the identity of the one person in town that's going to be attending this auction. Well, this guy's also a bit notorious about when it comes to funds and all that. So, as we make our way into it, this is when the sheriff finally catches us and says, hey, I know you ain't the person you claiming, so I'm going to give you a chance to get out of this town. And lo and behold, sheriff's not too happy. So some sheriff is not necessarily on the side of justice. In fact, one side case actually shows he is not a good man. So, what do? Well, we do what any any Sherlock Holmes detective would do. We ignore it. We do our own thing. And eventually we get to where the person stays, who is actually quite sweet on the one working lady on the one boat. So, we get to that house, where we have a reenactment of certain things from the first game, i.e., a woman who was a slave. She's looking for her brother. And the brother, well, when we go in to investigate the house and come back to the, quote, carriage house, she's being in the process of being hung. This was a message from the sheriff. But Sherlock still continues after they rescue her and they find the boy who had witnessed a murder. Pardon. And so now they determine that the man was dragged into the swamp. Now, instead of being chased out of there that happens in the original, we go back to the part of NOLA that is, of course, where the swamp entrance is and all that, and we get help from someone there. Again, that's another key change. I think the help we got there was from a man in the previous one, but that we met the first time around, but now it's a woman, I believe. And we go into the swamp. And so we must navigate through the swamp, find the island. Now, you're on the right path if you come across a tree. And of course, before we start heading in, the sheriff comes after us, but lets us go, figuring we ain't getting out of that bayou. We ain't getting out of that swamp. And so, we work our way through, finding the place where, obviously, the danger is. This is where it's happening. This is where the guy is being held. We have to get past some alligators, which means satiating them, I think, before we find the camp where the rituals are performed. We find out what's been happening there. And we have to go down into a cave there to find the bodies and find things out. And have more hallucinations with Sherlock or travels to this alternate realm. And you have it also back in the asylum. This is a little bit more involved than it was in the original because, again, they didn't have all this in the original. You find the cult's place. You find in the original, it's just like an island. But in this one, it's a lot more. Cavern underneath, and you get more clues, but there's still something missing. Now, when they return to England after that, Holmes is trying to figure things out. Watson does a little sleuthing to try and find someone who can transcribe the book, and he thinks Barnes is interested in this stuff. So he takes it to Barnes, who helps him in translations. We also run across Mycroft, who, one, is concerned for Sherlock and warns Watson of that, but offers some help. A little side case that you can have Watson look into. We learn of Mycroft's, the extent of his spy network. But Mycroft gives us the missing piece. We discover basically the identity of the cult leader. And how he is linked to a lighthouse. And that is where we go into the final chapter, where Sherlock Holmes and Watson and Dr. John Watson are arriving at the location just as this ceremony is starting. So, of course, the doors and that are blocked off. So we must sneak in. Of course, the dangers of this is really starting to get to Sherlock's mind. But Watson's there, and they figure out, one, what's being used. Two, they find out how to shatter these special lenses that are causing this, to help with this. So they have to disrupt the ritual. So they make their way up the lighthouse to the top, where Holmes eventually goes up to confront this mad cultist. And John is left with the task to destroy these four lenses, which he must do while working his way through the crowd of basically enthralled people who has had their minds messed with. Now, of course, this is different from the original, because in the original there was only really one thing to do. This time you have four things to do. And you have Sherlock talking with the cult leader. So you have to make right selections up there before John can work on the next lens. And this is where this really got beautiful. The cult leader openly acknowledges that this has happened before. Quote, in other timelines. Which, in state, basically acknowledges that the first that this is a remake, that this game is a reboot, that this game is an alternate timeline from the reboot, from Chapter 1. This is the beauty that you put into a game that's a remake by acknowledging that it's not not quote the original story just redone. It's acknowledging that it's a different path entirely. This was beautiful in my eyes because they acknowledged the previous game. They acknowledged how popular it was, and they did this. I loved it. I was overjoyed with this. And so, this is where the story ends. Once the lenses are broken, a great wave comes, wipes out the cult leader. The procedure was an utter failure. The ritual was an utter failure. Life still goes on. Sherlock is this time shaken up over this experience. And it shows. See, in the original, which was told more or less in media res, it's more at the end of the story that you start it, and Watson's having bad dreams. Now it's Holmes that's having the dreams. Watson has typed up the story, but, as even Sherlock says, it's going to destroy your credibility if you publish it. To which Watson then burns it up. But the simple fact of the matter was he managed to type it up and get it out of him. But he is helping now Sherlock, who is not necessarily coping as well as he appeared in the original. This was beautifully well done. And yes, while it was delayed a little bit because of the war in Ukraine, where Frogwares is their production area at, this game is beautifully done. People may complain it's short, but the original runs about the same playtime, I would say, maybe a little longer. There's not much extra padding, and they took care of some things that were more tedious in the original. How do you improve? Improving a good story is very hard to do. It can be done. And with better technology to allow them to get certain things done, they did it. This was a fine game. This was an excellent game. It's a reboot that to me, this is a remake that to me improves on what was already there. And I'm not a big fan of remakes. It's also a game that's easy to get all the achievements of. As long as you do all your proper exploration, you can get all the achievements. And yes, you can save the game and make a mistake and then undo it, which is another plus. If you played the original, you'll love the remake. it takes away certain things, but it does it in a very good way. And that's all I'm going to say about this one for right now. And I get to talk a little bit more about it in the next bit, because next week we will have the timeline to date. Because we don't know if there's any more Sherlock Holmes games coming. That's all I'm going to say. Take care, all, and have fun. Bye.